أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوجد عبدا من عبادنا آتيناه رحمة من عندنا وعلمناه من لدنا علما. قال له موسى هل أتبعك على أن علمني مما علمت رشدا. قال إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا وكيف تصبر على ما لم تحط به خبرا. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so they found one of our servants on whom we bestowed mercy from ourselves, and whom we had taught knowledge from our own presence. Moses said to him, may I follow thee on the footing that thou teach me something of the higher truth which thou hast been taught. The other said, verily thou wilt not be able to have patience with me. For how canst thou have patience about things which are beyond your knowledge? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to another edition of Islam for Europeans. I'm your host, Robert. And I wanted to talk about some of the models that I learned when I was doing my master's degree in social psychology, because I think it has a lot of information that we can apply to existent Muslim organizations, whether that's mosques or MSAs, Muslim Students Association, or large Islamic organizations. And this model I wanted to talk about today is from a group of researchers called Deal and Kennedy. In 1982, they created the model of organizational cultures, and this is a basic, 2x2 model with two different dimensions. So the first dimension is level of risk. So level of risk is basically the amount of risk or I guess urgency that decisions that an organization or a company makes, right? So if you have a high level of risk, right, the penalties of not following through properly or doing the wrong move are very dire in this type of setup for an organization. And if they succeed, they could be very fruitful, right? So, and the highest manifestation of high level of risk would be that every move or every decision that a company makes could possibly bankrupt the company or create serious negative consequences, right? So a low level of risk in an organization is when a mistake is made, it doesn't affect the organization that much. It's only like a very small hit, right? So that's the first dimension on Deal and Kennedy's organizational cultural model. And the second is speed. The second dimension is speed of feedback. So speed of feedback is how quickly you get feedback on the decisions that you've made, right? If you have a high speed of feedback, that means what went wrong, went right, right away in your organization. So the feedback is immediate, right? A low speed of feedback is when you don't realize the effects of the decisions you made as an organization days, weeks, months, sometimes years before you actually know the outcome of your results, or sometimes even never, right? So from these two dimensions, which are basically on a 2x2 model, they came up with four basic organizational types. And as a caveat, there are critiques of Deal and Kennedy's model, and it's not perfect. It doesn't take into account cultural national differences, and sometimes you can have all four different cultures within the same organization based on which department you're in. But in general, the four basic types of cultures are as follows. You have the tough guy macho culture. So this is where you have a high level of risk and a high speed of feedback. Right. So an example of a tough guy macho culture in terms of a profession could be police officer or a firefighter, where the actions that you take can have very dire consequences for the organization, and on top of that, you're getting feedback right away. I used to work for a ma and pa pizza restaurant where the owner is also the manager, and in a small town, word gets around if you make a mistake on an order, and you have a lot of loyal customers. If you make a mistake on a pizza, you can get yelled at, you can get chastised, and make sure that you don't do it again, right? So that's a tough guy macho culture. It's a very aggressive type of culture, right? So that's the first culture in this model. The second is the work hard, play hard culture, right? So this, you see this culture a lot in sales. This is where you have a low level of risk, but a high speed of feedback. So, for example, if you're, a salesperson like a clothing store, and you sell, your customers buy maybe $50, $100 worth of clothes, and then you forget to upsell them on, buying like a hat or a pencil or some other type of knickknack. And then, the supervisor might say, "That's a great job you did there, but you didn't. You got to remember to upsell them next time, right?" So low risk, it's not going to bankrupt the company, but you're getting feedback right away. So in this type of culture, it's a very collaborative environment. It's a very team-oriented environment. You see a lot of pep talks, a lot of team, events and dinners and things that really, build like, like the team spirit, right? So sales is a good example of this, the work hard, play hard culture. Right, so it's the third culture, and this is the culture I wanted to focus on for the topic of today's video, is the bet your company culture. So this is when you have a high level of risk, where the mistakes that a company might make could be very dire to the point of, say, bankrupting the organization or create, like really negative consequences. And on top of that, you have a low speed of feedback. So the company or the organization might not know, the results of their decision until later on down the road, right? So think of like companies that make aircraft, like Lockheed Martin or Boeing, or automotive companies, like Ford. This is where, they hire specialists, they have lots of meetings, really meticulously doing as much research and development as humanly possible, doing lots of interviews and focus groups and everything to make sure that their decisions are going to be good for the company. Because if they make a mistake, or if there's a defective part, it can create dire consequences. It can bankrupt the company. It can sometimes create a recall, and it doesn't have to be part related. It can be public relations related. For example, the car company Chevrolet, when they produced the Nova in the 1980s, it was a big hit in the United States, the Chevy Nova. But when they tried to market it in Latin America, it was a giant failure. Why was it a giant failure? Because Nova in Spanish means it doesn't go, right? So that's why it was a flop in Latin America. And the research and development team, even though they may have been really smart in terms of how to build the product, they didn't realize that there was no one that spoke Spanish, obviously, on their team. So that created like a huge loss of income for Chevrolet, and I believe they were eventually swallowed up by GM. So that's the third culture, and the last culture is the process culture, in which you have a low level of risk and a low speed of feedback. So a lot of this is like bureaucratic organizations, government, education, especially if you take a look at maybe like professors that have tenure, for example. So and a university might not realize that a university professor is making huge errors in their teaching until maybe years down the road. Maybe they find out that he was arrogant, or like not very communicative, but you're not going to see that normally on the teacher evaluations that you give, because students who don't like these teachers don't end up going to class in the first place, so they end up not writing teacher evaluations that are constructive or critique of the professor, right? And many times the university doesn't really care about teacher evaluations, right? So and it's a low speed of feedback, so you don't get the results right away. Another perfect example of this, if you see the movie Office Space, right? Office Space is a perfect example of a process culture. It's a lot of paper pushing. The mistakes aren't really dire. Like, when they say, you forgot to put the cover on the TPS reports, right? Who cares? Not putting the cover on the TPS reports is not going to bankrupt the company, right? But you don't see that normally until like sometime afterwards. So that's an example of a process culture. So why am I telling you this model? Well, I wanted to apply this to what I see in Muslim organizations and tell me if I'm right or wrong. But in my estimation, many times Islamic organizations, and this is not totally their fault, most of the time, but they have a bet your company culture, but they don't treat it like a bet your company culture. They treat it like a process culture. Okay, so let me give you a concrete example. A couple years after I converted to Islam, the mosque that I used to go to, I guess there were a lot of, the board, right, which is comprised of, like, the uncles, and the kind of like the mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, first gen Muslim brothers. you know these were brothers who were very active in the community, and they used to live a haram lifestyle, but they straightened up. A lot of them straightened up, and what they wanted to do is build a youth center for the Muslim youth in the mosque, in like the basement of the mosque, not in the prayer room, but they had an empty room that was there that was not being used, and they got the go ahead from the board to build this youth center for the Muslim youth, right? So it had a pool table, it had a ping pong table, it had a foosball table. They had a Muslim artist come in and draw this wonderful urban style Islamic art. And it was also a sustainable business. So, they would charge a membership, for Muslim parents to have their kid come to the Muslim Youth Center when they were open. And it was gender separated. So the brothers would have the Muslim Youth Center on Friday nights and Saturday nights, and the sisters would have the Muslim Youth Center on Saturday and Sunday mornings, right? So wonderful idea, right? I mean, the whole model behind it is that you're keeping kids out of the clubs, right? You're keeping them out of the haram environments, and you're getting them into an environment that's an Islamic environment. It's actually at the mosque. They're having fun. There is a room they could do their homework in. So a lot of Muslim kids would go there and just do their homework, right? They had like a library where you could like read stuff, and it was a wonderful idea. And then when the adhan was called for prayer, whether it was Maghrib or Isha, the kids would stop playing and they would go to the prayer room. They would pray with all the uncles and aunties, and then they would go back to the Muslim Youth Center once they were done the prayer, right? So, I mean, this did fabulous things. So, for example, it kept Muslim youth out of the clubs, right? It kept them in a halal environment. It got them attached to the mosque, right? So, this, even for kids that weren't old enough to go out clubbing. I mean, you kind of just attune them to the being in a mosque environment. So like you want them to stay there and gel and grow this community, because these are going to be the future leaders for your community, right? And also for the parents, it's very busy raising kids in the West. For the parents, it was a good way to not have to hire a babysitter. You can just get a membership. And then there was an older brother or sister who would run the youth center and would sell pop and chips and just look after the kids, right? So so all these positive things for this youth center, right? Now, about a year later, this youth center was completely shut down, right? So I don't know what happened. And here's another thing. Before I say this, the brothers who built this youth center with their bare hands, right? They wanted to take this model that was being used at this mosque and apply it to all other mosques in the West as like a template, right? So this wouldn't be just positive thing for this community, but other Muslim communities in the West, right? And the board just basically said, we don't want this thing anymore. Why? I mean, one can speculate. I mean, it could have been that the kids may have been too rambunctious one day. Maybe they thought that, it's a pool table, it's batil. The foosball table is batil. Batil means evil. Like this Laziza, this bottle of Laziza, which contains no alcohol, looks like an alcohol bottle. Maybe even something haram happened there. Who knows, right? But you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? And I really think that this was because the people who shut this down thought they were living in a process culture, because they can't see beyond the horizon. They can't see months, years down the road, because they don't see that these kids, since they have no other place to go to have fun, they're just going to go out, to the bars and the clubs right? And end up drinking alcohol or doing drugs or committing fornication and end up ruining their lives, right? So, uh, and like on top of that, this just created a schism in the Muslim community because the people who are for this youth center just got totally turned off by how the mosque ran things, and you didn't see them that much anymore, right? So this was just absolutely one of the worst movies you could possibly make. And I think the brothers who built this, they realized that the decisions that we make as a Muslim community are going to have ripple effects that we're not going to be able to see for a very long time, right? And that's why you have a high level of risk when it comes to these organizations, right? I'll give you another example. This cuts more close to home. There was a brother that I knew who went to a university, right? And the Muslim community was basically divided between the Muslim Students Association, who were very pious and practicing, and wanted to reach out to all non-Muslims and wanted to create a good image for the Muslim community, right? And didn't have this kind of anti-white racist attitude that a lot of other marginalized youth have. So that was one half. And the other half were the marginalized Marxist, leftist, progressivist youth who joined these national secular groups, very anti-West, very anti-white, and just had a lot of anger towards the West in general, and basically thought that the overwhelming majority of white people hates Muslims. No, it's nothing to do with us. And even if they do express some sort of interest, they're going to end up proving treacherous unless they bend the knee to their, leftist ideology, right? So I heard through the grapevine that because this brother that I knew who went to this university, there was a brother there who was very loud and vocal and was actually, one of the heads of this organization, and made it his business to start, saying this kind of anti-white rhetoric wherever he went. Like, I don't know, just the whole thing says go away. Like, don't, as if you're a white person, don't even bother getting interested in Islam, right? So about a year down the road, we found out that this brother was hired as the youth director for the local mosque. Right? So, like, yeah, I was going to spread his ideology to all of the youth in that particular mosque. So, and because to a lot of these mosques, there's really no screening process. Like all you can do is just basically show up a lot of the times because they need volunteers, and they just put people where they think they're going to be best. But a lot of times it ends up being a disaster, and you don't realize that until years down the road. And finally, there's another example. There is an uncle, and every mosque has one or two of these aunties or uncles like this. There's an uncle that we have at the mosque that made it his business to yell and scream at any non-Muslim woman who is entering the mosque not dressed appropriately. So this was important to our mosque because the basement was where they had like lunch before and after Juma prayer, right? So they would sell falafel and meat pies and things like that. And this mosque was next to a school, right? So you had, Muslims went there as well. So a lot of Muslims would bring their non-Muslim friends to buy food there. So boys and girls. And sometimes, let's be honest, like as a caveat, I'm not some sort of liberal. I do realize that when you go to a mosque, there are etiquettes that you have to follow, right? And I'm not trying to say that it's okay for non-Muslim women to dress this way. Having said that, when non-Muslim would come in, not even going to the prayer room, just to the basement to buy food, nonetheless, to support the Muslim community. There was an uncle who made it his business to verbally and physically attack these women and kick them out of the mosque, right? So what happens when that happens? Well, she's going to tell her father or her brother or her friends and her family, and everyone saw it. And then word will get around that Muslims are intolerant, that they hate women, that they hate, the kuffar, and it's a religion for them, and this is who they are, right? So, but this uncle basically had carte blanche to do this. I mean, like Muslim communities, and it's understandable that they want to be respectful towards their elders, but at a certain point, you have to realize that the decisions we make are going to have ripple effects that are going to affect our standing as a Muslim community, right? And it took like a lot of weeks for someone finally to work up the courage to tell this They didn't even go through, they didn't just tell this uncle directly. They had one of his relatives say, yeah, you can't do this anymore, right? And yeah, it just goes to the idea that like a lot of Muslim communities think that they're in a process culture. A lot of these organizations, when really it's about your company culture, because they don't think that they don't understand the level of risk involved, with these types of decisions. Okay. So I don't want to be totally negative. Like, you have examples, before you even break the ground on a new mosque, right? What is it going to look like, right? And, the mosque in Dublin, Ireland, the Muslim community in Ireland was very smart. They respected the architecture of the Irish and their language. And the Dublin Mosque was built out of an abandoned church, basically. So they kept the architecture of the people, they refurbished it, and even the word Dublin Mosque has the word Dublin Mosque in Gaelic written on it, right? So, it shows people that Islam is for everybody, even the Irish, right? Which is a 4D chess move. It's a really smart way of looking at things. So because you have people on the board who are very smart, who look into the horizon and say, where do we want to be as a Muslim community in 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years? Right. So, like a couple of, that's basically what I want to try to get at. I mean, like now, having said that, I understand that a lot of this isn't on the Muslim community per se, right? I mean, a lot of this, it's very difficult for them to see into the future like this. And even myself, I'm the first to admit, me as a convert, I was naive to a lot of things because I didn't understand how Muslim communities function. I didn't understand, I guess, the level of historical grievance and the reasons why there's so much mutual animosity between Islam and the Anglosphere. So a lot of the decisions I made, or a lot of the recommendations I even made to mosques, end up, like being complete failures, right? So I guess you have to live and learn. But if you look at companies like Boeing and Ford and Lockheed Martin, where it's about your company culture, they have focus groups, they have interviews, they have feedback constantly, they have research and development. They make every possible, precaution when they move forward with making a decision, right? And I think that's the attitude that a lot of Muslim organizations and mosques need to have, because it's going to have, ripple effects down the road. You know, and like sometimes, like I said, you could have all four cultures in the same organization. Like I found that the open house is kind of a tough guy macho culture because it's even though the level of risk is high, you want to put on your best polished image. At the same time, you're getting feedback right away, right? So I remember when we had the open house one year, and we were very, the imam was very strict, and I agree with him, very strict on shaking hands with members of the opposite gender. It's haram in Islam. We don't do that. But at the same time, the morning of the open house, there were in the lobby, there was a table, and two brothers were basically heading the table. And me and the other younger brothers who understand the Western society, we were like, look, uh, we understand that we can't shake members of the opposite sex's hands. However, in Western society, it's very rude not to get a handshake, right? So what we should do is we should have another table set up and have two sisters there. So that way, when the non-Muslims come in to see the mosque, the non-Muslim men can shake the brothers' hands, and the non-Muslim women can shake the sisters' hands, right? So at least they're getting a handshake, right? So you can solve a lot of these issues while still following the Sharia. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to present solutions as I'm some sort of liberal that wants to break the rules, right? We just have to start thinking outside the box, right? And one thing that I will say, and this is where I made a huge mistake, is that the open houses altogether have like kind of this built-in flaw that really the Muslim community doesn't realize, and I didn't even realize myself, and that is that only the people with a very, very, very positive image of Islam and or are very brave are ever going to go to an open house, right? So Muslim communities will try to do open houses because they think, oh, we want to reach out to, the greater non-Muslim community. And we want to, dispel their misconceptions, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there about Islam. The people who have misconceptions about Islam, who have a negative or maybe even a neutral attitude about Islam, are not going to go to an open house. They're terrified. To a Muslim, entering a mosque is like a place of solace, right? You feel like you're in the house of God. You're in Baytullah, right? But for a non-Muslim, like the first time they ever heard the adhan is the opening scene of The Exorcist. Right? So a lot of them are just terrified of even entering a mosque. And even if they work up the courage, even asking a lot of these questions in public, they're not going to feel comfortable asking those tough questions. And in 2022, like, the consequences of appearing Islamophobic are very great. So a lot of times people don't want to ask tough questions about Islam because they don't want to be seen as racist. Right? Even in dawa booths, when it comes to dawa booths, right? You're in a public place, talking about religion is taboo in and of itself, but to actually be seen at like a dawa booth is it's very rare if people want to do that, right? I mean, usually, and I've done dawa booths at universities, 90% of the people who go to dawa booths are just Muslims, right? Or people who are very, very inquisitive about religion to begin with. So the open house does have its place, but it has a built-in flaw, right? And with that flaw, it's not going to solve the issue of converts, right? And that's why converts need to have their own organizations, because when someone does convert to Islam, the most important thing is that, and I've said this before many times, people to communicate with their family members. And they're not going to feel comfortable going to a mosque most of the time. They may feel comfortable going to a neutral territory, or, sometimes may have to actually go to their house. And, maybe they just want to, maybe just even an anonymous phone call. Right. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff we can talk about here. But I think Dale Kennedy's organizational cultural model can be applied to Muslim organizations, and we really need to look at what kind of organization we're actually running. I mean, I can understand why these particular issues would not mean much to many, Muslim organizations and many mosques. Like you take a mosque that doesn't really reach out to the greater non-Muslim community, they don't really care about, non-Muslims getting a handshake when they walk in the mosque, right? They don't really care about, and to an extent, I can't really blame them, really. I mean, they have enough on their plate to worry about already. And to them, it's like, this is our territory. We paid all this money to build this mosque. Like we're gonna, you're entering our turf. You have to do as the Romans do, which is understandable. And I'm not here to ask them how to run things. You have mosques that are run by South Asian Muslims where the iftars are so unbelievably spicy. I can handle them, but I love hot food. But your average Westerner or even average non-Muslim Arab, I mean, they're not going to be able to handle this kind of food, right? And that's a bet your company culture thing. I mean, that means that people aren't going to your mosque, to eat iftar because it's so incredibly hot. Another point is women too. Like some mosques don't even allow women, or they're just segregated and just this tiny little cubby space. And for some South Asian Muslim women, they're like, I've heard them say themselves, like, we don't want, mashallah, we don't go to the mosque. We're not like Westerners who, bring their women to church and stuff. If that's how they want to do it, more power to them. But that is having dire consequences on the health of the Muslim community. Right. So that's my time for the day. Thank you so much for your patience. I wish I could create more videos, but I finally got my webcam going on my laptop. Hopefully I can get my studio back. Please like and subscribe to Islam for Europeans. Leave comments in the comment section if you agree, disagree, have other thoughts to add. And, if you have time, you have the Islam 101 courses, which we're doing, that Brother Yusuf is doing. May Allah reward him for that. So, and again, that's another thing, instead of having an open house, have videos on YouTube, Islam 101 courses. That way people can watch, learn about Islam from the comfort of their own home if they don't feel, reluctant going into a mosque. So that's it. That's all I have to say. My name is Robert from Islam for Europeans. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.